Okay, hi everyone. Please feel free to come on in. Don't be shy. I will not run out and grab you or anything. I don't need volunteers for this, so all good. My name is Emily Pogozelski. My company is Pogo Photo. I do mostly weddings. I work mostly in Vermont. I do live part-time in Florida, so if you see me later, my badge does say Jupiter, Florida, but I'm only there in the winter to kind of decompress for my wedding season in Vermont. So I use MagMod products for modifying my light in a bunch of different ways, and I'm going to talk about 3 different ways that I do that throughout the course of this. So let's make sure my clickers are working. All right, great. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is twilight shots, how to do a very quickie, easy twilight shot, something that I really worked on for a long time and finally figured out how to do quickly and easily so that the client has a good experience. I'm going to talk about dance floor stuff, how I use grids to modify my light on the dance floor. And I'm going to talk about starscape shots because this is something that I think is a little bit of a complicated topic that doesn't have to be so complex that you can't do it on a wedding day. It's just something extra to kind of work your way through. A little bit of feedback there, sorry guys. Okay, so starting off with a 5-minute twilight portrait here. This is a shot that I did literally, I think this was 1 minute into the setup. There are a couple of key features of doing this. So for a 5-minute twilight portrait, you're going to need the timing of twilight, and I'll get into that in just a couple minutes. You're going to need your ambient settings, and what I usually recommend is don't try to do this with your couple. Don't try to be figuring out what your settings are going to be for your ambient light or for your flash with the actual client. Grab your assistant, grab your second shooter, grab your bartender that's on a smoke break, whatever you need to do. Get somebody else so that you're not making your client sit there while you're kind of tweaking with your settings. Make them think that you're brilliant and you can do it in 1 second and you're done. Just do the quickie test ahead of time. For my off-camera flash for this, I'm actually going to show you here. I use the CTO MagGel, which is this one in the color corrective kit here. At the moment, I'm not talking about the colorful gels here. These are really great for artistic, interesting things, to do unusual, cool color stuff. But today I'm talking about just these corrective ones, and in specific for all the things that I'm using them for, it's going to be the full CTO gel. We're also going to put on the off-camera flash, a speed light or something small like this, a grid, a MagGrid, which is going to narrow the beam of the light so that it's really directed and really focused on what you need it to be on. And we're going to use the MagSphere, which just softens things a little bit. And it's nice and portable and easy to just take on and off. So, sorry, yep, there you go, MagSphere. So what time is twilight? And this is something that I got wrong for years and years and years. I kept doing this thing where it was as if a race car was driving by and I wanted to take a picture of the race car, and I would wait for it to drive by, and then I would go click. Why didn't I get a picture of the race car? Where did it go? It's because I was waiting too long. I was waiting way too late in the evening. I was waiting until it looked really nice and blue to me, but then balancing that light with a flash didn't really work. It didn't come out the way I expected it to. So twilight, for this purpose specifically, not for astrophotography purposes, but for this type of photo, for a blue sky photo, it depends on the location, on where you are, whether you have mountains in the way, whether you have any other type of physical locations, and it's going to depend on your weather, as in, is it cloudy, is it overcast, is it hazy, is it super sunny that day and it was a very clear sky. All these things kind of take into effect a little bit, so you have to trial and error this just a little. And it can be as soon as the sun sets, and by that I mean literally the moment the sun dips below the horizon, you can be in twilight for this purpose specifically. It's not blue hour. If you've heard people say like, oh, it's blue hour, this is so beautiful. Technically that has a definition, and when you look at an app that will tell you when blue hour is, that's not going to work for this type of shot if you're setting it up the way that I'm showing you. So I've got a little screen cap here from one of my favorite apps. This app is called, sorry, I thought I was doing that somehow. This app is called PhotoPills. It's one of my favorite just photography apps in general. It does a whole bunch of, whoop, I think we might have lost sound. Yay, nay? You still hear me? Yep, yay. So PhotoPills does this really great stuff where you can see all kinds of different options. In this case, this is kind of down to your most simple thing. This is basically what time is sunset, what time is twilight, what time is blue hour, what's going on here. In this case, I went, great, look at these blue dots here. These are wonderful. That's what I'm looking for, right? Like I want to have nautical twilight's probably what I want. So I kept looking at these timings, and this is where I kept getting the time frames wrong. Because this photo was taken at 8:31. If you can read the little tiny print there, I know you guys are very far back. You can come closer if you'd like to. The tiny print says sunset is at 8:27 p.m. This is 8:31. This is literally a couple minutes after sunset, which really let me get that beautiful blue in the sky, but not have it be such a long exposure that I couldn't balance it very well. So in this case, we don't care about what these blue dots say. We just want it to be right after sunset. So civil twilight is not astronomical twilight. Astronomical twilight has a whole different definition. Nautical twilight has a whole different definition. In this case, you don't want blue hour. You just want right after sunset. So I've got a little diagram here, kind of a thing I sketched out on the iPad earlier. This shows you how the light is actually hitting the bride right in the face, which sounds kind of mean, but right at her, skimming past the groom, and that's just with these features on it, with the gel. So my settings here, if you can read these, this is a 35mm lens, which I have set to 2.8. I wanted to do that so that the tent in the background was not quite as sharp as the actual couple. I wanted to have a 200th of a second to make sure I could capture them not having to freeze in place for this shot. I wanted them to be very relaxed and natural. And I wanted to have my ISO at 100 based on the sky brightness. My white balancing camera is set to tungsten. And then the flash modifiers, as I showed you earlier, are the MagGrid, the MagGel with the CTO gel, and the MagSphere. So camera position-wise, I'm actually crouched down very low, which I'm not going to do because I don't want to knock the mics off of the back pocket here. But crouched down very low, aiming up at the client so that I don't have people walking by in the background, because it's a wedding reception. So I pulled them out for about a 5-minute period. It was a very, very quick, hey guys, come with me, let's do this, let's do a couple other photos, and walk back in. So on the way back in, I just want to show you what it looked like as a scene. This was what it looked like 5 minutes later. It was that much darker. So these are the same settings that I had without the flash, obviously. But that's how much darker it got within 5 minutes. This is still nowhere near twilight. So that's the main thing for those. Any questions for? Yeah, you guys can come forward a little bit. I don't want anyone to get run over in the aisle there. Any questions on any of the twilight stuff? Yeah. So that's sort of the question is, how am I focusing? In this case, for this photo, there is plenty of light. There actually is. Like this is not a dark photo. This is right after sunset, so it's not darkness yet, which is sort of the advantage of doing a twilight shot immediately after the sun has set. Is that you basically, if the sun is setting there and I turn around and shoot the other direction, there's no more like golden glow in the sky. It's blue in that direction, and you're just dimming your ambient light settings down enough so that the sky is the color blue that you want it to be. Which in this case, ISO 100 with a 200th of a second was plenty dark. So it's actually plenty bright enough to really just take the picture. Totally fine. Anybody else? No? All right, so there we go. So the next sort of section of the talk here is about reception lighting and how I'm adding grids to my reception lighting. This is something that I talk about a lot with my class at the wedding school on using 4 off-camera flashes to be able to do very versatile, interesting techniques within a wedding reception without having to have an assistant. So it's something that I've been working on modifying this class a little bit, because the last couple of years since I developed that class, I've started to modify my off-camera flashes quite a bit more than I used to. So this is the actual class for there. I wanted to give you a really brief overview of how I use lights. This is a 3 hour long class, a 2 hour long class. It's long, it's like workshop style, lecture style. There's a lot going on in there. Yeah, it's a long class. I can't really like recreate that here, but if you're a wedding school member or if you want to check it out, it's a really great community. I highly recommend it personally. Susan Stripling's company there, so hi. So the brief overview of how I do this is you have 4 flashes around the edges of the dance floor. Sometimes I have them really close on the dance floor, sometimes I have to pull them back a little bit, and I make modifications because of that, but mostly it's A, B, C, D in a circle around the dance floor, and I'm able to control 1 flash, 2 flashes, 3, all 4. Sometimes I add fill flash in addition to all of them or one of them, or sometimes I just use one of them by itself. It is versatile because it's all controllable from my camera. I use Photix transmitters and receivers. I call them the dumb receivers, not to be mean to them, but because they don't think for themselves. I do everything manually, and it works really, really well. I've been using this system for years. However, there were a couple of times where I went, I don't love the light that I'm getting from this, but I'm not sure what I want to do with it. So I wanted to show you a few things that I went through the archives and pulled up things from the same venue that I shot in different ways with the same system, and the only difference in these photos is that I added a grid to my off-camera flashes. So this grid really focuses the beam of light. It keeps it from spilling up and spilling down and spilling from side to side. So all of these cross-lighting things in the diagram there, they're really being very narrowed and not so much of a, hey, look, there's light going everywhere kind of thing. So on the left, you can see this is a tent. It's a nice tent venue. It's a permanent tent setup. You probably have venues like this somewhere near you. I don't know how many of you do wedding photographers in here? Yeah, 1, 2, 3, 2. There's like 3 of you, great. So tent venues are pretty common. Where I shoot in Vermont, they're not as common. We have plenty of tents, but we have a lot of barns. And so barn weddings, I actually want to be able to see some of the spilling light up onto the rafters because it looks really beautiful. But for a tent, if you have a lot of decor in the tent, it's not ideal to have a lot of light bouncing around and lighting the decor too much, especially if you have a lighting designer who's doing something really interesting and different. Like the one on the right, they've got these great chandeliers. And if I hadn't used the grids to really narrow these beams of light, there'd be light scattered around like there is on the shot on the left. So the other thing that I was able to do here is the Mag shoe, where your flash just pops right on the top of this, and then you can angle it. I just angled it 1 click down so that it was about, I don't know if I can actually raise this without messing with the speaker, let me know. Probably about that high, and 1 click down with the MagGrid on there to really direct the beam of light. Now this let me focus this right on the dance floor so that the couple, while they're dancing, and again when they're doing parent dances, when they're doing toasts, if someone's on the dance floor, I can really get this light and choose which of my lights I'm going to use. But it directs the light and keeps it from spilling all over the place. So, additional venue. I don't love this venue. I like most things about this venue, but the dance floor itself really frustrates me because it has this weird dropped ceiling where if you look on the side, on the left side, you can sort of see these white parts that come down a little bit farther. And then it's vaulted, and there are beams, and there are antler chandeliers, and they actually did an impromptu horror dance where they're lifting them up in chairs. And I thought someone was going to die, but they didn't. Luckily, no one got hurt. But it was kind of a tough situation to photograph there. And I kept finding that my eye kept going up to the ceiling because the lights were just bouncing everywhere. I was getting way too much extra spillage from those lights. So the one on the right is not like my most epic, interesting photo, but I was trying to dig through it. I mean, when you take a photo, you don't really think of it as, oh, in 2 years, this is going to be my before photo. Like, that's not really the goal there. You're not like, oh, I'm going to get so much better. These are all going to be before shots. At the time, I was happy with what I was getting, but wanting to make some adjustments. So I really tried to find something from this past fall when I reshot there that would show you the same angle. So that's why I picked this shot. And you can see that the lighting looks completely different. Your eye doesn't go straight to the ceiling anymore. It doesn't go straight to the back wall anymore. And this is with all 4 firing along with on-camera fill. So this lets me really focus on the people in front and not on the wall and the ceiling behind them. And third example is another reception venue that I love the venue overall, love the people there, love the location. The dance floor is not great. It's a very low ceiling. It's like an acoustical tile type ceiling. But when I was looking for before and after photos, I found this one on the left and I went, well, that looks pretty good. Like that's what I've been doing recently. What was I doing then that was so good? Like, why does this look the same as what I'm doing now if I wasn't using grids? And then I looked at the before editing shot, and I was dodging and burning to fix it, to make it look like what I now shoot without having to do any editing to it. I like to get things right in camera. That's kind of one of my mantras there is just get it right in camera. I came from a film background, as in like, film, not making films, darkroom processing, that kind of thing. And we couldn't really do a ton of editing at the time. We could do some dodging and burning, but everyone always said get things right in camera, and I think that still applies now, partially because it saves so much time in the processing department. If you do it yourself, which I've been doing it myself for years, that's going to save you a ton of time personally. And if you outsource, it's going to make outsourcing a lot easier for the person you outsource to. I think that you can clearly see the difference between these two. I'm not sure what the venue was thinking, by the way. They have like lattice work fencing at the top of that pillar. It's terrible. It's really ugly. So being able to use these grids on the flashes really directs the light down. It doesn't let it spill quite so much up into the ceiling, and it gives me the look that I want, where it's a dark, kind of sexy, fun dance floor. I don't want to just have light blasting everywhere and filling every nook and cranny in the entire place. So that's it for this sort of section here. Questions on any of this? Yep, exactly. It is, yeah, and I don't always use all 5. The question is, do I also use on-camera fill? So I do sometimes not. For wider angle shots, I tend to use it as just a little pop of fill. I usually zoom my on-camera fill. I shoot Canon, so ETTL minus 1/3 of a stop or minus 2/3 of a stop usually works pretty well for me. Probably about half the time during a reception, if I'm doing dance floor stuff like this, I'm going to have just a little bit of fill, so I don't get sort of funky shadows that I'll sometimes get depending on the situation. It can be slightly more reliable, or if people are like really kind of huddled in and I want to get underneath, a little bit of fill will kind of help it keep them from having like light just from behind them. But sometimes that can be really cool effects. So I do pop it off once in a while I turn it off once in a while so I can get like a good variety of shots there. Yeah. Yes?
These spheres, are really 4 flashes, have spheres and grids, or just grids?
I just use the grids right now. This is something I'm sort of continuing to work on. I'm not certain that for this type of what I'm trying to achieve here that I need to use the spheres there. So I haven't started doing that. I've been thinking about kind of playing with it back and forth. I know lots of people do, but in this case I just use the grids. Yes?
Your on-camera flash, what does it have on it?
My on-camera flash has nothing on it.
Just bare?
Yep, so I just use a bare flash, direct flash. I do zoom that just a little bit with the manual zoom, but it's just ETTL minus 1/3 or minus 2/3 is usually all I really do there. Anybody else in there?
Just one more question.
Yeah.
So you have 4 flashes in the 4 corners of the room?
I do, yeah.
Okay, because I was going to say you can't get 4 around the dance floor, really, without having them knocked down.
You can. In the right-hand side, they are actually at the 4 corners of the actual dance floor. The left-hand side, they had a band that was taking up half the dance floor. So then they were actually dancing in like the dining area that's usually there. So I had to move 2 of the flashes back a bit.
It worked.
Yeah, but it works. I talk about this in the class that I do for the wedding school, but I don't like having light stands that people can trip on. So I use these things called ball bungees to bungee, like you can daisy chain them together. So I bungee them to pillars, like those big ugly pillars there. My flashes are actually bungeed around them in the case on the right, which works really well. I end up using those bungees for literally everything. I give them away all the time. They're cheap, they're on Amazon. It's good stuff. Any other questions on this part? No? All right, so I've got one more quick section here. Kind of breaks down starscape portraits in a way that I think will be pretty approachable if you've never tried it before. Astrophotography is a big subject. I'm going for like a very, very small part of it here. There are people who are experts in this. I don't pretend to be an expert in astrophotography, but this part I really like doing when it's possible to do. So I'm going to break down a little bit of when you would need to do it and why you would want to do it and how you would actually have to do that. So Astro Basics, again, photo pills. I talked about this a little bit earlier with the screenshot that I had for the time for twilight. Photo pills is incredible. It can do things like show you what time something's going to sunset, moonrise, all those things. But you can also have it do stuff for the Milky Way, where it'll do augmented reality overlaid over what your camera is seeing in your phone, so that you can see exactly when the Milky Way is going to rise and set, and whether it's going to be across the sky like this, or straight up and down, and what direction that's going to be. So you can really plan ahead of time and not just have to go out there and eyeball it and figure it out. which is incredibly helpful. So astrophotography basics for wedding days specifically, you need a tripod of some sort. Like, this is not the kind of thing that you can just go, oh, I'll just set it on this bale of hay and it'll be fine. Like, you need to be more precise than that. So any kind of tripod will technically work. Nicer, lighter tripods will be more pleasant to use. Old, clunky tripods will be kind of annoying and heavy to carry around, but they'll still work. I currently have an ongoing system with my father where he's an amateur photographer who's been doing astrophotography since like back in the days of, here's the film you're gonna load into your black and white. Yeah, it's been a very long time for him. I luckily don't have to do all that because it's a little more challenging to learn when you're doing it like that. I get to actually have the advantage of looking at the back of the screen to see if I got it right. So he usually gives me his old tripod as an excuse to buy a new tripod. So my favorite thing is to go to like Photo Plus Expo or something like that with him. He's in the Northeast. And we'll go and we'll look around and he'll say, oh, I really want that tripod. And I go, oh, you should get that. Yeah, you should get that tripod because I know I'm gonna get his old one. He'll ham and haw a little bit for a little while. And I wind up with the old ones. This has been happening for about 15, 20 years now that I've gotten his cast offs, and it's great. And I actually would really like a new one, so I'm hoping he gets a new one this year sometime. I think that'd be good. So the PhotoPills app that I mentioned before is crucial for this for me. And then the key thing I'd like to tell you here is that really, you need to practice this first. This is not the kind of thing that you should be doing on the fly or that you should promise a client if you've kind of thought about the logistics of it, but you've never tried it and you haven't had repeatable success with it. It's tough. It's not difficult in terms of the actual concepts, but it takes practice to get it right consistently. So I would really recommend try this with your friend, try it as a self-portrait, whatever you're gonna do. This is where focusing in the dark comes into play. It's tough. The way that I've found works the best for me is each lens that I use for astrophotography, I actually mark on the lens where infinity is to get the stars sharp. And if I'm going to try to get the couple in the same plane, PhotoPills has like a focal distance chart, I think they call it, that helps you kind of figure out how far away they need to be from the camera to make sure they're also in focus. But the way that I prefer to do it, because I care more about whether the couple's in focus than about whether the stars are in focus for this particular situation, is I like to kind of cheat by having my assistant go over with an extremely bright light. I tell the client to close their eyes and hold very still. And they shine the light right on their faces, and I focus, and then I set the focus to manual so that it's not gonna automatically change by accident. And I lock everything down really tightly on the tripod. I triple check that, yep, that is indeed in focus. And then we turn the light off and we take the shot. So I double check that every single time because the last thing you wanna do is these long exposures and then you don't have the shot because it wasn't sharp enough. You fix it later, I don't know. I don't wanna do any of that. So I do triple check focus and that's the way that I do it. But that's something that takes practice and takes time. And every little bump of something, if you're not used to exactly where your equipment is in the dark, you bump the lens by just a little bit and it's out of focus. So you really want to practice this a bunch. And then the last thing you need is cooperative weather, which might seem obvious, but if you want to do star photos, you need stars. So that's definitely something you have to kind of keep an eye on. You can't really promise this for a client because if the weather's not helpful, you're not really going to get anywhere with it. So keep an eye on it. Don't promise this is something that you could definitely do, but something you'd like to do if given the opportunity. And then know roughly what you're going to be looking for and when you're going to be looking for it. Plan it in advance and give it a try. But again, practice with a not client first. So this shot is from a couple of years ago. This was the first shot that I got with a client that I really was very happy with the results. I got the whole thing in camera to most of this extent. Like the only editing done in here is in Lightroom. So I'm pretty happy with the fact that I didn't have to composite multiple images together or any of that. However, this is a Canon 5D Mark III, Sigma 24 to 35 at 24 millimeters. I usually use a 16 to 35 2.8, but this was not in Vermont and not my usual gear kit because this wedding was in Hawaii at the top of a mountain and I didn't have all of my stuff with me as per usual. I didn't need the wider angle lens for anything else. I didn't drag it along with me. This is an f2, ISO 2000, and it is a 25-second exposure. So this is not something where you're popping off a bunch of them in a row. Like these take time to actually capture the image. So 25 seconds is what's gonna give you nice, beautiful stars. And you do rear sync on the curtain on the on the flash to pop the flash right at the end of the exposure, so that you're not going to have it be blurry for them if you pop it first. So you need full darkness. In this case, this has full darkness with no moon, which makes it even better because you're not going to get a lot of glare from moonlight coming from the side. Makes it a little tougher to focus, but again, I've kind of got a system down for that with a very bright light. You can even use the flashlight on your phone for something like that if you're just trying to focus. Works pretty well. And in this case, this is a 10,000-foot mountain peak, so we're actually above the clouds. There were clouds that night that were below us. Like 10,000 feet is where they turn on the Wi-Fi on the plane. Like, that's really high. So in this case, we did not climb this mountain. We drove to the top. This is Haleakala National Park on Maui, which is astounding. If you ever have the opportunity to go, I highly recommend it. They actually recommend that you go for sunrise, which I'm sure is lovely, but I am not a morning person at all. And there's just no way. And I think you have to make a reservation for sunrise because it's so busy. So we said, you know what, how about sunset? Let's go for sunset. So this has the advantage of it not actually being a wedding day. It was the day after their wedding. Yep. Yeah, we could have, because it was a very small wedding. This is a photographer friend of mine actually in Vermont. This is Paul Reynolds, who is wonderful and does starscape stuff like this with his clients. And we talked about wanting to try to do something. We weren't really sure what. And then we came up with this idea of driving to the top of the mountain. We thought, oh, let's do that. So we did his wedding the day before and then went up to the top of this place, waited for sunset, shivered in the car because, by the way, at 10,000 feet, it's very cold. They were freezing right there, absolutely freezing. I was huddled in like all of my layers because it's Hawaii. You don't bring like coats to Hawaii, right? I had one like little puffer coat and every other layer that I had with me, and I was freezing. So we huddled in the car until we got full darkness, went out, did this for a few minutes, and then we drove back down the mountain to get warm again because it was just too cold. So this is not a typical Vermont day. This is not on a wedding day. This is not something where I've had to deal with the stress of like drunk groomsmen, drunk bride and groom. There's a number of things that can kind of go wrong. Them too. I'm actually going to get back to the drunk groomsmen because they affected the next shot here too. So this had a lot of advantages, a lot of pros and cons to doing this not on the wedding day. It's nice if you are able to do that for a destination wedding. It can sometimes work. It's not necessarily going to work otherwise. So this is what it looked like straight out of camera. And immediately you can kind of see there's an issue here in that it's not blue. It's not a nice looking like dark night sky. And that was the thing that I was kicking myself about at the time. So this shot has a grid, has a MagSphere, and it does not have a gel. So, sorry, going forward instead of backwards. So that's my husband there shivering in his puffer coat. And then that's the couple shivering with no coats at all, just absolutely freezing. And he's holding the light about that far away. I figured this is easy for, behind the scenes, even though it's not. And he was very easy to take out of the scene. The Lightroom, you just flown him out, no problem. But the color was bothering me. And on this screen, you can't quite see it, partially because this is such a yellow backdrop. This is a very golden glowing thing. I think I probably just set to daylight balance, like what I usually use. And the light on them looks fine, or it might have been set to flash, but the light on them is fine, but the sky doesn't look good. And later on I went, did I not have a gel with me? Why didn't I gel? I knew technically I should have gelled it, and I just didn't. And I felt very lazy after the fact that I hadn't gotten it right in camera, and I went, you know what, next time I'm gonna plan ahead better. I'm gonna remember to have all this stuff handy. I'm gonna have that gel ready to go because I wanna be able to do this correctly in camera. So MagGrid, MagSphere, no gel. So before you ask, I re-edited this for you. This is what happens if you just shift the white balance manually. And you go, oh, we'll just set it to tungsten, it'll make the sky nice and blue. Yeah, well, it makes them really blue too. So that kind of gives you the direct effect of like, well, that's what that gel is doing, is it's warming them back up while letting the rest of the sky be very blue. So how do we get this instead of this without having to fix it? And the answer is a CTO gel. So we talked about these a little bit earlier. It's just the full CTO is what I'm talking about for this case. It works beautifully. You set your white balance in your camera to tungsten, use this, the sky looks blue, the thing you're lighting with your flash looks normal. It's wonderful. So CTO is color temperature orange. I don't know how many of you have background with any of that, but it's called that for some reason. I don't know why. I've never looked into why they call it color temperature orange, but CTO, CTB is the this one, which is color temperature blue. For whatever reason, they've got those two. In this case, we're going to set the white balance to tungsten, use the gel on your flash, and we avoid fixing it in post. So 18 months after that shot, I finally had a couple who was super psyched about it, said, we really want a star photo. They saw that other star photo and said, we love that. We want to book you. And if we can, we want a star photo like that. And I said, well, that was in Hawaii on top of a mountain on the next day. There's a lot of variables. Like, there's so many variables. I can't guarantee that. But if we can, let's do it. Like, let's try to do that. Let's try to get it done. I'd love to work with you too. That would be fun. Excuse me. It's very dry in here today. So this is the out-of-camera shot. And again, with the yellow background here, it's a little tough to tell, but their skin tones and the color of her dress are accurate because I used the gel and I was able to set my white balance in advance. So this is actually the 16 to 35 on the Mark IV, because I upgraded bodies in between 18 months. F2.8, 25 seconds again, ISO 2000. If anyone is familiar with astrophotography, you might notice something I did wrong here, but it might be a little bit too far away to notice, so I'll just tell you. 25 seconds is too long of an exposure for these stars. And that is based mostly on the body of the camera. When I upgraded camera bodies, I didn't check the little lovely app that I use. PhotoPills has a feature called Spot Stars, where if you want like the perfect round spots without having any kind of a star trail, if you do too long of an exposure, they start turning into streaks around the North Star. That's not ideal for this particular situation. It can look very cool in other ways. But Spot Stars will let you enter in the camera body and the lens you're using and all of your other settings, and it will tell you exactly how long you can have an exposure before they start to streak, which is super, super helpful. I didn't think to check it because I didn't realize the camera body affected it quite to that extent. In this case, I believe I should have had it at 22 seconds or faster. So it's pretty close. If you look really closely, they're like a little bit oblong. Not too bad. In the future, I would have just jumped the ISO a little bit and done a slightly shorter exposure. It would have been totally fine. So I've got the off-camera flash again here, which is also a slightly different flash. I moved on from using speed lights to using the Godox AD200, which lets me use a separate transmitter from what I usually use so I can control it manually from the top of my camera instead of having to walk over to the flash and adjust it each time and ruin my night sight by the really bright back of the screen there. That is a game changer for me. I love that. But it's the same type of thing. It is a grid, a sphere, and in this case, we have a gel. So, I keep forgetting I gave myself helpful bullet points in case I forgot to say things to you, and then I jump ahead. So in that case, this is what we ended up with. And this is only 5 to 10 minutes or so of editing. There was not a whole lot I had to do. Most galaxy photos, starscape stuff, you're going to see a lot of post-processing done to them because raw files are just sort of murky looking with any kind of haze. So I really just cleaned up the background a bit to take a few stray houses out of the background because, you know, we're not on top of a mountain. And that was it. That was the sky. That was the color balance. Everything worked beautifully. And the client was absolutely thrilled. Now, back to drunk groomsmen that I mentioned earlier. This was a very distracting situation. The groom himself was fairly intoxicated. He'd had a really fun reception. This was on the summer solstice, which if any of you are aware in Vermont, that means the sun doesn't set till like 9 o'clock. And you don't get full darkness until 10:30. It was late. So they'd had a really great time at their reception. Really, really great time. The bride was fine. She was remembering to plan ahead for this to like not be completely annihilated. So she's actually holding him upright there. Like he was swaying quite a bit because, you know, it's dark and I'm saying hold very still. And if you've ever been in the dark when you're a little intoxicated, holding very upright and still is not particularly easy. He had the additional distraction of his intoxicated groomsmen. This is on a big family farm. They have some on-farm vehicles like an old Volkswagen Bug that people just sort of drive around the farm. And these guys had gotten into this Volkswagen Bug and they're just bombing around on these hills in the middle of the night. And so they're driving up the hill at this point. And the streaky thing I left in on the side there in the before photo is my husband walking quickly with his phone in his hand, walking over to them to make sure they didn't run me over where I was crouched with the camera on the ground because they're just driving up the hill so quickly. So that's why the groom looks so alert in the shot. He's not particularly alert. He's just realizing that his friends are driving up the hill at him. So that actually really helped. And this was my test shot, and that's what I wound up giving to them because he looked so much more awake and interested than he did where he was looking kind of sleepy and a bunch of the rest. So, but the client's thrilled. They're super happy. All in all, this took us about 10 minutes total, including getting them to and from the site from where the tent was. And it worked out beautifully and got it right in camera. So that's about it on astrophotography. I can take questions on any of that, on any of the earlier stuff. Happy to answer things. This is me on Instagram. If you want to find me, that's where I sometimes post stuff once in a while when I'm being good about social media, which is very rare. And yeah, that's about it.
Cool. Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, absolutely.